Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a while since my last video. I just haven't had any good ideas of what to make, but today I wanted to show you a tutorial on digitizing and how to get clean line work with the satin stitch. So I had some empty walls up in my house and I wanted to put some artwork. So I thought, why don't I just embroider some artwork? And I went ahead and played around with Midjourney AI, came up with this picture since it's just a personal project. And I'm going to show you how I go about digitizing this using only the satin stitch and pretty much having no trims or cut. I thought this image would be great to use because it is just a bunch of thick lines, which would translate beautifully into embroidery. So if you're following along at home, feel free to take a screenshot of this picture on the screen and you can play around in your digitizing software and try to recreate it on your site. So first, let's go over a few tools and settings to be aware of when we're digitizing. I have my software pulled up. I am using Hatch embroidery software, and this piece is going to be done only using a satin stitch and a few running stitches. And with the satin stitch, when you're doing a satin stitch, you have two options. You can do just digitize a line and set it to satin stitch. If I'm making some satin stitches here, it looks like that. However, I am not going to be using this line stitch satin feature because you have less control over your angles and then the ends. You can't really get that tapered pointed look. So instead of using digitized open shape for the satin, we're going to be using this digitized blocks here on the left in Hatch. So with digitized block selected, I'm going to have the fill option selected. You have fill and outline. We're only using the fill option. And then I have my stitch type set to satin. And then I'm going to trace over this same shape I did, but I'm going to make it a pointed end. So let's say I want to start thin and then work my way up to the 2.5 millimeter size. Then when I get down here, I can start making it smaller. It's a little sloppy, but just to give you an idea, it does give you more control. So that is why I do prefer using digitized blocks. Now, technically, you could do this piece in the digitized satin. You just have to do more work to adjust your stitch size as you're getting those tapered ends. Using the digitizing blocks tool can be a little tricky to get used to. I know in the beginning it was hard for me. It was a very slow process for me to digitize, but it is something as you practice, you'll get faster. So that is the digitize block satin tool we're using. The other stitch we'll be using is just the basic single run stitch. We'll be using this to reduce the needs of trims and jumps. So you actually won't see this single run stitch on the finished project. We're going to be using it hidden under as we travel through, and I'll show you how that works. The other setting you want to be aware of is in Hatch specifically, if I go to software settings, going to look at embroidery settings, and I have this setting called apply closest joint while digitizing. We want to make sure this is checked. Usually it is by default. Sometimes you might turn this off. But this is important because it is going to reduce the work and make sure the start and end points are automatically connected. So what that means is, just to show you here, if I have this shape I'm making, and I'm going to go into the edit mode so we can see the start and end points. So the green dot right here is where the stitch is starting, and the red is where it's ending. So let's say my next shape is going to be right here. Because I have that setting turned on, apply closest joint, you'll notice once I apply this stitch, the endpoint's going to change. So now I hit enter, and if we go back, we can see my endpoint was down here. It's now moved up here. And when we move to the next shape, it's going to start right here. So this is going to prevent cut and jumps from having the machine stop. So if your software does not have this apply closest joint while digitizing or something similar, you'll just need to be mindful that as you're editing and creating different shapes, you'll need to go in and manually change the start and end points on your design to reduce those trims. Okay, so now we can get started digitizing. So I have my artwork pulled up here and I have resized it according to the hoop I'm using. And this is going to be a pretty large design, about 11 by 14 inches. So make sure you are sizing your artwork according to the hoop you're using. So I said we're going to be doing this with virtually no trims. Ideally, I would like no trims, but based on the artwork here, that is impossible because of the eye on this cat. So you can see when we look at the eye, there are no lines connecting the eye. All the other lines are joined except this. Therefore, you have to have. So when I'm done digitizing this, there will only be one trim, and that is when it does the eye and then has to jump over here. So let's get started. So I'm not going to be digitizing this whole piece. I'm just going to show you probably the face here, and then the rules I apply, you would continue it throughout the piece. So I'm going to start on the eye because that is the one place I'm going to have a trim. I'm going to get zoomed in, max 600. I'm going to not go any bigger than that. And then I have my digitize block selected, satin stitch selected, and I'll do this in purple thread so it is contrasting. We can see the progress we're making. So first, I will just make my satin stitch along this eye pupil. So for the next part, I'm thinking through how I'm going to digitize it. There's actually two ways to go about this as I'm thinking through. The first way would be to have kind of two overlapping satin stitches. So I will do this bottom part first. And then I can do the top eyelid. And that looks fine. There's also another way to do this. So I'm going to move these over just so we can see the difference. So when I did this eye, you can see we had the obvious overlap. These are two separate lines, and that looks fine. But another way to go about it is to kind of make all the satin blend in so it looks like a continuous line. So to do that, I would start, doesn't really matter where I start because we're going to connect down here. I'm going digitize part of the bottom, not the ends. And then I'm going to have the corners of the eye kind of be an end cap. So if we go straight across now, we kind of make that end cap, keeping in mind the angles so that they line up and look like a continuous. I'm going to fix that later, but let's just finish this here. And I'm just going to adjust this here because it looks a little messy. So there, as you can see, same eye, but two different looks. So as we're going through and digitizing this whole piece, I'm going to keep in mind when two lines join, do I want to have them overlapping or do I want them to look like a continuous line? And for the eye specifically, I do like the first look better. I think that's more natural of how an eye is. So we'll go ahead and use that one. And then there's the eye, and then this will be where our only jump would be. So now I'm going to think, where do I want my jumping off point to be? Okay, so I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to start right here, not at this nose piece, coming down the mouth. And then continuing along the mouth here, we'll go and get the whiskers set up. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here because we have a bunch of lines crossing over each other and we need to be thoughtful of how we digitize this. So I like to think of this kind of in real life. When you're looking at a cat, the whiskers are coming out. They're over the cheek. So when we do digitize this, I want to make sure that the whiskers are a continuous line, unbroken. So just to show you the comparison, I'll do one whisker as one line, unbroken satin stitch. The whisker right above it, let's say we did this first. If we did the cheek first, where we had the cheek going over, same as here. And then we tried to do the whisker. Keep in mind we don't want to intersect two satins because they would be too thick. Let's say I stop there and then continue going here. Stop and then finish the whisker. And while you're digitizing this up close, it looks fine, but realistically, you have the whiskers are going behind the cheek and the cat spot, which doesn't quite right. So you need to be careful of when you are digitizing, make sure you're taking a step back, keeping what type of image this is in mind, and that's going to determine your order of operations on digitizing. Okay, so let's go ahead and digitize this whole cheek and whisker area. And then based on how I digitize these whiskers and cheek, that's going to kind of be the same rules that I apply to the whole image. But this is probably the most tricky part to think about because you do have the whiskers here. So I stopped right here and I don't want to keep going. So you might think, well, why don't you just keep going? And then later, when you do the whiskers, you can just go over it. And it looks fine on the software, but this is two satin stitches, full density, overlapping each other, and that's going to be really dense, and it could cause an bird's nest or jam. So we don't want to have two, satin fills, tatami fills right over each other. So what I'm going to do is I've stopped here, and then I am going to stop and keep going on the other side. Now, because this is such a small jump, what is this? It's 1 millimeter. So the software is set and my machine is set to not trim if it's anything under 2 millimeters. So the machine would just continue here. It's not going to stop. It would just be a long extra thread connecting the two areas, which is fine. If the gap was larger here, then I would have to put a running stitch in between them. And that would act as the same to ensure the machine doesn't stop. But these are such small gaps, it doesn't matter. So I've gone up there and then this is again a place where we need to stop and think. So I could go ahead. My initial thought is just to digitize there and stop, here stop, and here stop. And then I'm going to be up here. So because I'm trying to have no trims, I'm being thoughtful of how can I not back myself into a corner. And I think we can do that. So I'll go ahead. I'm going to keep digitizing here, skipping over the whiskers so that they don't overlap the satin stitches. Okay, so we've done that spot on the cheek. Now we can do our whiskers. And just thinking this through. So for this first whisker, I could go all the way up here. Okay, so I'm stopping right here. Even though this is a continuous whisker and it should be, I haven't digitized this part before. And my plan was my thinking is after I do this whisker face area, I'll come up to the nose, up here, do the ears, and then I'll come down here. So what I don't want to do if I were to continue digitizing the whisker right now and finishing it, what's going to happen is when I come down here and do this, I'm going to have to stop and continue here. And even though the machine won't trim because this is like less than a millimeter, it's going to have an extra stitch going across. So I want to avoid that. So I am going to digitize the rest of this later and I'll be able to pick right back up. And it technically won't be a continuous satin stitch, but it'll look like one. And we just continue it later on. So finishing that one later. So I've done this piece and then I can come down here and do this next little cheek part and then do the next whisker. And this whisker, we can finish it because it's not overlapping any of the other parts that we haven't digitized yet. And then go down and do the same thing. And you'll see here on the artwork, there are these little dots. I'm ignoring those. Technically, I could digitize them, but they're really tiny and I don't think it's going to make a difference. So I'm skipping them. That is up to you to decide what you skip and what you digitize. Okay, so as I'm doing this, I realized I made a mistake. I got myself into a corner. But as you'll see here, first, actually, I digitize this before I do the last whisker. So if I do this last whisker, I won't have anywhere to jump out of without having the machine stop and cut. So let's say if I do this, well, I'll go ahead and do it anyways to show you. So I've digitized that and great, this side is done and it looks good, but there's no other lines for me to digitize to get out of here. And I could stop right here and jump. That technically would be a jump and it probably would be fine, but I'm trying to minimize those jumps. So what I should have done is, and I can still fix this. This, I should not have digitized this as a satin stitch. It should have been a running stitch, which is what I will do. I want to change this to a running travel stitch. So I'm going to have to remove this, but I'm going to just change the color for now. So after going back in time, after I did this first stitch down here, I would want to have my single run stitch and use this as a traveling stitch. And then after here, which technically we could go a little more, after here, it would then continue in doing everything else. So rather than delete everything and start over, I just have to change the sequence of my items. So this blue line, technically we just need to move it down. So let me think here. So the line I just put was this one, and I want it to be where the blue one is now. I'm just going to move this up in my sequence editor and manually adjust my start and end points and make sure this ends here. And I'll just delete this for now. We don't need it. And my end point is there, ends here, starts there, start here, and then it keeps going. Okay, so that looks so you can and probably will find yourself doing that. And nobody's perfect at digitizing. A mistake, but you can save yourself if you just carefully reorder your items in the sequence editor. Okay, so now that I finished that, so this was the last line I did. Now we can go ahead and finish this part of the cat's face. There you go. So now just to see how that looks and make sure our trims and everything are good, I'm going to go to the playback view and we're going to see how this stitches out. Okay, so now you can see as we're doing this, it's all going in one motion. So if I go into my true view just to confirm I don't have any unnecessary trims, we should only have, this is where the machine starts, and then it goes into the eye. After it finishes the eye, it does have to trim. So the triangle here means it's the machine is stopping and trimming, and then it is jumping to the next part. And then the triangle here is because that's the last part I've digitized so far. But technically, there's only one trim from the eye. So yeah, what you saw me do right now is pretty much the same logic I will apply to as I'm doing the rest of this. So my next step would be after I do this mouth here, I would probably do these whiskers and then come up and do the nose, the ears, and then come down and do these plant leaves and work my way into the body details, going all the way around. So I actually have a finished digitized version here. I'll switch to it. So here we can see this ended up taking me, I don't know, like 4 hours. It actually is pretty time consuming when you're doing this method. And this is a rather large picture. It's about 46,000 stitches. So it definitely took me longer than I thought. But as you can see, there's lots of thinking. How do these lines intersect each other? How is my passing? Not backing yourself up into a corner, or maybe you do back yourself up into a corner and you need to figure out everything out again. So let's just watch the playback here to show you how the direction of the stitches as it stitches out. I'm going to speed this up. But I started up at the face and then I worked my way counterclockwise going around. And there you have it. And here is some pictures of the finished result. I ended up doing two similar looking pictures of, cats and plants to fill a corner in my kitchen. Here's the second one I did. And the first one, they are very simple, but I liked how easy they were and simple. And while it did take time, it was a lot easier than if I were to do a bunch of like tatami fills and a bunch of colors. So I think they ended up looking nicely. And if you're interested in knowing how I went about and turned these into actual framed canvas art, I'll be posting another video on how you can frame your embroidery art so you can do similar. Hope you found this useful. Let me know if you have any questions or suggestions for other digitizing embroidery videos I can make.